Good evening. Welcome back to our third and final edition with world-renowned leading scholar of Islam, Robert Spencer. Welcome back to the third edition, Robert.
Jamie, it's a pleasure.
Nice to have you here.
It's great to be back.
Robert, we left with some questions in the last portion. I'm going to...
This is your fan mail?
Yes, this is my fan mail. Here was one question that stood out, and then we'll get to the rest of the program.
Yes.
Robert Spencer, why do you take a position where you won't be popular and be a star in our culture? Instead, take the popular position and you won't have to fear for your life, and you can be cutting edge and popular with mainstream media and with lefty communities.
Okay, I'll get right on that.
But have you ever considered how, I mean, for instance, what influence do you have in Washington and in the mainstream media, etc.?
Well, I don't have any, but I'm telling the truth. And so as long as I'm telling the truth, I figure the truth will out. And ultimately, people will realize that all these things are true. And in the meantime, I'm not really concerned about who doesn't realize it. I'm just going to keep working.
So do you think that that's a problem in the culture and media at large, that they, you know, because I've seen a lot of your debates, they actually don't want to face some of these central facts
no doubt about
Islam.
that. Yeah.
What is your main thesis about Islam, and what is it that so frightens our culture, our higher literary culture, and the mainstream media? What can't they accept?
Well, I suppose the main thing is that Islam is not just a religion in the Western sense, but a political and social system that is supremacist and authoritarian, and that would deny equality of rights to women and to non-Muslims, and denies the freedom of speech and the freedom of conscience. And as a political system that is supremacist and must dominate and not be dominated, in the words of Muhammad, it is something that is at variance with the U.S. Constitution in many ways and threatens our freedoms. And people don't want to face this because, well, we've all been taught that religions, any religion, all religions are benign and good things that people ought to have and ought to be something that it's just racist or bigoted or just mean to speak anything
Robert,
critical about.
There does seem to be a certain phenomenon, because I noticed that if I ever, like, let's say there's an honor killing or female genital mutilation, or we hear of a terrible crime, or whatever, or let's say what's happening to Rifka Berry, etc., that when you mention these horrible things that are being perpetrated by Muslims inspired by Islamic theology, right away the answer is, oh, but not all Muslims are like that. And,
yes.
and this is not Islam. This is just a few extremists or a few individuals. Instead of compassion for the victims, there seems to be instead an emphasis on silencing the person raising the issue.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And how do we fight against this? I mean, overall, this is the left, right? The left is suffocating our ability to point to the victims of adversarial culture. And
well, you know, United in Hate, which is a great book, shows that the leftists and the Islamic supremacists share a totalitarian impulse, and an impulse to silence their critics, silence their opponents, rather than engage in rational debate on a level playing field.
Robert, what hope is there that change can come from within Islam? For instance, we've got a few of the teachings. There shall be no compulsion in religion. Mm-hmm. There's that, you know, people often point to that. That's
yes.
in Islamic theology. We have that if you kill an innocent person, it's like killing all of mankind. So there's something to work with.
I don't think so. Sorry.
Okay,
Look,
just
I think we have to be
just
realistic.
Just a sec. So, as you have taught, as you have taught, there's 4 Islamic schools. There's 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence.
In Sunni Islam, yeah.
And there's no such thing as a school that teaches peaceful
That's right.
Islam. But what power can reformers? What power do reformers have to change that?
Well, the problem here is you quoted a couple Quran verses, and when you're talking about 2:256, there's no compulsion in religion. It's really it's something that's not understood in the way that we would like it to be as Westerners by Islamic scholars. It's generally something that is understood as meaning that you don't force somebody to convert, which sounds great, but then when you see the deprivations of dimitude and all the ways in which Jews and Christians in the Islamic State are deprived of basic rights, they don't think of that as compulsion, but they make life so hard for them that they end up converting anyway. And you talk about no innocent people should be killed, and the problem is that also in Islamic theology, no non-Muslims are innocent. And so these things are not really avenues for reform. I think if there's going to be any reform, and I'm not holding out hope for it, it would have to be a rejection of literalism in terms of the Quran in general, and a kind of spiritualized and non-literalistic form like Unitarian Christianity developed. But I don't think that's likely to happen.
Okay, now do you think that this is what is actually so scary for so many people, that they cannot accept the things that you're saying because the alternatives, excuse me, because the reality is just too frightening?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember I was debating a professor who wrote a biography of Muhammad, and of course I wrote a biography of Muhammad, and we were debating a few years back at a conference in Las Vegas, and he got up, and after I made my opening statement, and he said, if what Mr. Spencer is saying is true, it's very disheartening. And as if that meant it must not be true. Well, I'm sorry to be the bringer of bad news, but the reality is that we can't solve this problem until we look at it realistically.
And if we look at it realistically, therefore, there has to be an honest discussion about the teachings in Islamic theology that inspire jihad.
Absolutely.
And so what is the best way for that to occur for the West as well as for within the Islamic community?
Well, I think we have to call them on their nonsense and keep on doing so, and that's what I do every day at Jihad Watch. When these Islamic apologists in the West, these slick liars and smooth talkers and deceivers like the Imam Rauf and Reza Aslan and Ibrahim Hooper and Nihad Awad and so on, when they spread these distortions and lies and half-truths about Islam, we have to show what they are saying to be false and continue to challenge them to relate the situation about Islam accurately and show that they are not trustworthy spokesmen, so that people have to go to find the truth about Islam
But
elsewhere.
Robert, with the left that controls so much of our discourse and literary culture, what are the chances in your mind that that's going to happen?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen at all from the left. That's why we have to have alternative media. That's why we have to have Jihad Watch and Front Page Magazine and so on, and keep putting out our own books and keep telling the truth, and the truth will out.
So, Robert, we have a few minutes left. Let's turn to you personally for a moment. Quickly,
no comment. Yes.
quickly, what is your background? Did you always have the beliefs that you had? For instance, were you always a conservative? Were you always interested in Islam? What has been your intellectual journey?
Well, I was not always a conservative. I was very far left in college. I worked at the Revolution Books, the bookstore of the Revolutionary Communist Party.
You're a communist?
Yeah, and I got better. And I started reading the Quran and studying Islam also in college, and that was out of personal interest because of my family background being from the Islamic world, and came at it with a very benign and positive view. Had a lot of Muslim friends in college, and they were very, very much trying to convert me. And so I thought that I would read this rather in the spirit of gaining spiritual wisdom. You know, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita and reading various other scriptures from around the world, and read the Quran, and found it to be very different and much more interesting to me personally than the others. So that very early on I began to see, well, there are these elements in Islam that teach this warfare.
How did the second thoughts come?
That just from reading the book, that these things were being taught in the Quran, and then I would see at that time the hostage taking in Iran and the Islamic rhetoric coming from the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I saw right away, even at that time, that in the early days of the Islamic Republic, what they were doing and saying matched with what I was learning about Islam.
I see.
And so they weren't twisting or hijacking Islam when they were
Right.
setting up the Islamic Republic.
Robert, in a lot of ways, you are a voice crying out in the wilderness. The mainstream media overall suffocates you or ignores you, a higher literary culture, etc. What does it feel like to be alone a lot of the time? What does it feel like to be slandered and smeared? How do you keep the faith? How do you not get disenchanted or tired or cynical or jaded?
Well, maybe I am disenchanted, tired, cynical, and jaded, but actually, you know, I don't really expect anything from those people because I see through them. I know that what they're saying is false. And so I know that the higher literary culture and the mainstream media and so on is corrupt and bought and paid for and is sold to these interests that are teaching, that want these other things out that are false. And so I don't have anything but contempt for the New York Times or something like that, and most mainstream media reporters. And so it's not as if I expect anything
Is there
from
a
them.
spiritual toll that's taken on you in this battle? Just this feeling of being alone and a lot of the smears against you? How
Well,
do you
I
prevail?
don't sit around brooding, but I think that this is a tough fight, and certainly it's important to marshal one's own spiritual resources in order to maintain an equilibrium.
Before we go, give us some. Where does hope lie? Well, why should we be hopeful, and what can viewers that are watching do to help you and to get on the front lines in this battle for our civilization?
Well, there's always hope because we are telling the truth, and what we're saying is right, and we're trying to defend human rights in Western civilization, the notions of the equality of rights of all people, and the freedom of speech, and the freedom of conscience. These things are worth defending, and I think that ultimately the human spirit will demand that they be defended, and that we will ultimately prevail. And in the meantime, of course, all kinds of support is welcome. Certainly donations are gratefully accepted. There are a lot of initiatives that we would like to undertake if we had the funding. There are quite a few things that we could do with Jihad Watch, quite a few things that we could do with the American Freedom Defense Initiative if we had funding. And so that's always gratefully received. And prayers and support and defense and activism of your own is also something that everybody should be engaged in terms of taking up the battle yourself. Don't sit back and expect everybody else to do it. Jamie and I and everybody else that you know who are engaged in this struggle are just free citizens like you are. So get up and do something.
Let me end on a lighter note. There are about 7 questions in here that I couldn't ask you.
Okay.
You were once a little bit on the chubby side, and now you are looking like, wait a minute, we had some letters saying you look like Van Diesel, you're toned, you're sculpted.
I don't know who that is.
Do you have a secret in terms of how you got into such great shape?
Yeah, stop eating so much.
Is there an anti-Islamic workout of some kind that you've been doing? Robert Spencer, it was a pleasure to have you. You look great, and continue the battle.
You too, thanks.
Robert Spencer's latest book, co-authored with Pamela Geller, The Post-American Presidency. Buy it. Good night.